All right, so now the reason for many of you are here tonight, which is the results of our community study. So the question is, part of it is, do we really understand who our community is? Where do people live? What are we doing? What are people's interests, attitudes, etc.? So what we want to do is, instead of working off anecdotes, we wanted data. So I'm grateful to these individuals and foundations who were supportive of funding this Jewish community study. These are not inexpensive things to do at the level that we did it, but we are grateful to this committee who helped to participate. In addition, we had a small committee work through the request for proposal process, and that is how we determined to come to Brandeis University to do the study, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we put together a technical advisory committee of people with expertise in the area of surveys, data collection, etc., to help to actually develop the questionnaire survey that was used in the study. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. So I want to know how many in this room got called for the survey or contacted for the survey. Okay, there we go. That's part one. Part two is, one of the first questions people ask on the survey is how many Jews are there in Portland? So I'd like to know how many people think there are less than 10,000 Jews, less than 20,000 Jews, less than 30,000 Jews, okay, less than 40,000 Jews, less than 50,000 Jews, okay, less than 60,000 Jews. Okay, so, all right, so a little bit between 40 and 60. Okay, well, we'll find out in a second. So I want to say a couple of very quick things. Number one is Brandeis did a phenomenal job, and you'll hear from Dr. Len Saxe in a second, but Matt Boxer was our partner from Brandeis University who worked hand in hand with us and it was really a remarkable resource and really educated us tremendously about the study. Number two is the study that you're going to hear tonight is for the greater Portland metro area, which goes up to Cowlitz County in Washington, down basically to Salem area, okay, but not including Salem. We then did a second study, a smaller study, that goes from Salem and the Willamette Valley all the way down to Lane County. That is a separate study, and those results are being shared with the Eugene community and the Willamette Valley community tomorrow night, okay? All of this, every bit of the data that you will hear, and you're not going to hear it all tonight, but the pieces you hear tonight and more will be live on our website by Thursday night, okay? The link will be in the Jewish Review and in my Friday's Mark's Remarks, and you can read anything and everything you want to do about the study. It's 120 pages long, and it's got a lot of detail and a lot of information. Two last things. There's always the, wow, that's really interesting on the study, but the most important thing is what do we do with this information? And number two is oftentimes if there's data on there that you're like, wait, that doesn't make sense, I don't agree with that, then people want to dismiss the study. Okay? The study is the study. The data is the data. There is no better data that we've ever had on our Jewish community than what you're going to see today. And Brandeis is a leader in that field, doing over 25 Jewish community studies in just the past 15 years. They carefully thought out a methodology, and if you read the report, you can read all about those details. So without further ado, let me invite Dr. Len Saxe, the Klutznick Professor of Contemporary Jewish Studies, who directs the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies and the Steinhardt Social Research Institute at Brandeis University. So let him get plugged in.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the community. Thank you all, those of you who completed the survey. You made what I'm going to talk about possible. So I can't promise kef ma'od. I can't promise lots of fun, but I hope I will stimulate conversation and tonight begin a conversation with you about how to make this community, this extraordinary community, an even stronger community. So, not actually showing.
Yeah, click on the
Okay, hold on. There we go. Okay. don't ask me why. Anyway, there we go. Just two pieces of kavanah, two pieces of sort of direction, intentionality for you to think about this. And real quickly, we're in the midst of reading Sefer Bamidbar, the part of the Bible that talks about censuses. And there are two, there we go. Now I lost it here.
So it's on PC screen only.
Huh?
If you try. No.
There we should go.
What? Except.
Does that do it?
Yes, but then you're still showing up.
It'll go away. I don't know what the prayer is for a PC, but maybe we should go up to Microsoft and they have the solution. In any event, two things I wanted you to keep in mind. One is and basically it's why do we do a community survey? And we do it for the same purpose that our tradition tells us to do it. One, to figure out what our resources are, what our strength is, what our challenges are, to plan better. There are several parts of Sefer Bamidbar which talk about that. But the second piece is that our tradition teaches that counting people, understanding our strength is a way that we give our people pride. And we want to do it in a way that honors the individuals, honors their stories. So I'm going to give you lots of facts and figures, and I'm going to give a little bit of a narrative around those facts and figures. But what we really should be thinking about is how can we use that to make this a better, a stronger community. So here are some of the goals. Our goals were to create a portrait of the contemporary Jewish community, to facilitate strategic planning. We do what we call accurate and actionable findings. We try to create studies that have reliable data, but also data that's not just of interest to academics, that the community can use. And I'm here in part to begin a process with you of thinking about how you use what we know about the community to make it stronger. I won't spend a lot of time talking about our methods, and there we go. But doing one of these studies is really complicated. We have to talk to a relatively small group of people and represent the views of everybody, and we have to find a way to do it in a representative way. So we use all sorts of methods, essentially multiple methods, and we use some fancy statistical procedures to represent the entire community by our interviews with a subset. In this case, we had about 2,500 interviews, some done on the phone, some done through internet surveys. And then we try to put it together. That last line about multivariate analysis means that what we were interested in were discovering the diverse patterns of engagement, the diverse ways in which members of this community interact with their Jewish identities, enact their Jewish identities, and again, to develop it in a way that the community can use for planning. So, to start with the size of the community. So those of you who raised your hands at the end, you were closer to the truth. Now, this is science. This is the best that science has to offer, circa the present year. And one of the ways that I can come to you and say with some confidence that I think your community has grown and your community is of substantial size, is that we look for validating evidence. And I'll just give you one piece of that validating evidence. So we found that there are 56,600 Jews in the community, living in 31,100 households, and then there are approximately 75,000 individuals who live in Jewish households. We're using standard definitions. This is essentially the definition used by Pew, used by communities throughout the United States and actually throughout the world, and it doesn't really represent a change in definition. So the number is not the result of any change. The result is a result of what's happening on the ground. And I'll give you one brief insight into this, and it was one of the things that we did late in the study to try to see if there was validating information. And one of the things that we learned is that between 2010 and 2021, according to the census, the United States Census it's called the American Community Survey. This community, the greater Portland area, had an increase of 50% in adults who have a college education. That's an enormous change in the space of a little bit more than a decade. And the one distinctive characteristic that Jews have in comparison to other groups in American society is that, I don't know, perhaps we're overeducated. We have higher levels of education. We have double the number of adults who have college degrees or greater than the typical average American. And so what's happened, and it looks like the trough was the bottom in Oregon and in Portland in particular was in 2009, just before your last study, and it's been continuing even through COVID. The population has increased in this area. It's moved around, not as many people perhaps, for obvious reasons, live in the center city, but people live in this community. And so the community has grown, and we see it in the study because so many of the people who we interviewed are relatively recent, are essentially newcomers to this area. So this presents for you an enormous opportunity. Now, it's associated with something that, and you can see the numbers here, the numbers of adults, and I'll talk a little bit in more detail in a few minutes about the children. The second piece of it, so you have a large number of people, but at the same time, as you will see, and I'm going to tell you in advance the story that's going to get laid out here, you have relatively low levels of institutional engagement. And you can think about it if you so desire as a negative, as a problem, as an issue. I'm going to characterize it for you as an opportunity. You have a relatively low level of engagement. You have a young population. You have people who are geographically dispersed, who are recent arrivals here, maybe just starting out, creating their own families. That's an enormous opportunity. And we'll talk about some of those possibilities. And at the end, I'll try to give you my summary of some of the things you might think about doing. So where do people live? This is the big view map. Each dot, it represents around 50 households. You can see the distribution in the different areas. I'll zero in on Portland at the center of this, and so you've got about 25%, a quarter of the households in northeast Portland, and you've got the western suburbs with another large group, but a fair amount of dispersal. And one of the issues will be what's the overlay between where your Jewish institutions and programs are and where your population is. Age-wise, you look like other communities. You look like Portland, but compared to the rest of U.S. Jewry, somewhat younger and a larger number of people, in particular, in the 18 to 34-year-old group. In terms of children, in households where there's an adult Jew, that's our definition of a Jewish household, you've got over 15,000 children. There are 11,500 who, according to the usual definitions that are used, based on the description of their parents about how the children are being raised, are being raised Jewishly. Few of them are being raised Jewish in another religion, most Jewish alone. But you've got close to 4,000 children in Jewish households who are, at least according to their parents, not being raised at all Jewish. Related, not surprisingly, to what has been called intermarriage. And what you see here is that among the coupled individuals, and that includes people who are both formally married, as well as the people who are living together in a family situation, that constitutes almost 60% of the community. And what you see here is that there are many more intermarried families. We like to talk about it these days as one Jewish parent families than two Jewish parent families. Now, you may be surprised or shocked at the size of this difference. It's based on what I call the arithmetic of intermarriage, because it only takes one Jewish person in one Jewish parent household to form that household. It takes two Jewish parents in an unmarried or two Jewish parent household. So you're going to have many more intermarried households, and you're going to have many more children of intermarried, one Jewish parent households. What is the question? What is the underlying issue? The underlying issue is what happens to these children? Do they get raised? Do they get exposed to Judaism? Do they become part of Am Yisrael? Do they become part of the Jewish people? And I won't go into a lengthy historical analysis here, but one of the things that we know now about the American Jewish community and what's happened to it in the last generation or two is that beginning in 1981, at which point the first millennials were born, beginning in 1981, children who came out of one Jewish parent families were more likely than not to identify as Jews when they became adults. Before 1981, maybe 30% of the children of one Jewish parent would identify when they turned 18 as Jewish. For the generation after 1981, the ones that came of age around the turn of the century, around the millennium, it went to 60%, and it's now probably 65%. Huge, huge change. And one of the important things about this change is that it happened because of policy decisions made by institutions in the Jewish world, meaning that it didn't just happen It didn't, like, the sun didn't change, the economy didn't fundamentally change. It's a decision of the community to put its resources in educating a whole generation. And clearly here in Portland, given the numbers of one Jewish parent families, that issue is now ever more important. I would love to take questions, but I know it's late, and so I'll just work through this, and then at the end, if Mark will give me a blessing and give me a couple minutes, I'll take questions. In any event, this is the breakdown of what happens in families with one Jewish parent, two Jewish parents. For the two Jewish parent homes, almost all, universally, of the children are considered and are raised Jewish. An intermarried household, it is high. 60% is really extraordinary. 60% is greater than 50%. That means that the population is going to increase. Another group are getting, of those children of intermarriage, are getting exposure to multiple religions. And a fair number, though, are getting no religion at all. It's not like Judaism is in competition with other religions. Judaism is in, and religion is in competition, if you will, with no religion. Just real quickly, engagement. So one of the measures that we have that indicates the institutional disconnect of these newcomers and many in the community is that compared to other communities, you have a relatively low rate of household synagogue affiliation. 20%. The national number is closer to 35%. At the same time, and this is the bottom of the slide, it's not like people aren't interested in Judaism. People are just going to synagogues. They're just not becoming members of synagogues. Not everybody. You'll see about that in a moment. But there's a disconnect here, if you will, between the membership and the actual participation, even in Jewish ritual services. Because everybody shows these things, people are interested. Here are the numbers of people by denomination. And one of the proportions of people who are Orthodox, Conservative, Reform are relatively similar to not the absolute numbers, but the relative numbers in other national data. You can see that on the right-hand side. But the key issue here is that you have the majority of people, of adult Jews in Portland, saying that they don't identify with a denomination. And I'll show you how we're trying to deal with that. And I'll show it to you now. We call it the Index of Jewish Engagement. So what we've said is, okay, people don't want a label. People don't want to be called one thing or another. But in fact, we can see what they do. What are the pieces of their Jewish identity that they enact? What are the pieces that they don't enact? And are they different? And so we use some statistical techniques to come up with, we call it the Index of Jewish Engagement. And this is based on, and I'll show you the behaviors and what goes into this index in just a minute, but we end up with 5 groups. We call one the minimally involved group. Close to 30% have minimal involvement in all dimensions of Jewish life. At the other end, there's an immersed group, and they're involved in ritual, they're involved in communal activities, they're involved in Jewish culture, they're involved in home life. And then you have a group of people who are in between. And it's probably clearer when I show you the actual behaviors. So we look at holiday behaviors, ritual behaviors, organizational behaviors, and what we call individual behaviors. So we're not asking people, how Jewish do you feel? We're asking people how essentially they enact their Jewish identity, whatever that is. And you can see what's interesting here is that even the minimally involved group, they light Nerot on Hanukkah. They follow news about Israel, Abriut. They discuss Jewish topics. It's not like their Judaism is totally off the table, but obviously they don't look like the immersed, they don't look like the ritual Jews, they don't look like the communal Jews, and they don't even look like the cultural Jews. At the same time, understanding that the community is composed of different ways of being involved in Judaism, I talk about it as it opens a door or it opens a window for you to reach out and engage them. And here you saw the chart before about denominations. Here's the denominations by these what we call engagement groups. An interesting thing here is that the denomination really doesn't tell you what these people do. I think at one point in time in American Jewry, good friend Jonathan Sarna has written a whole book about this, that the denominational label, you told someone that you were a conservative Jew, a Masorti Jew, or a Reform Jew, etc., you sort of knew where they were, ritually, culturally, ideologically, etc. That's no longer the case. And what we're trying to do is to help you understand what these groups are. So a couple things quickly, and there's a 129-page report and a 200-page appendix. You can study this later. I'm just trying to give you some of the highlights here. So as I said before, only about 1 out of 5 households in the community are congregational members. And it is one of the most important pieces that distinguishes these groups. What's interesting is that you have 2 groups, the communal and the immersed group, where you have very high proportions of people being synagogue members. But you have, even in the ritual group and the cultural group, much lower levels of synagogue membership, but it doesn't mean that they don't do anything or that they don't think of themselves as Jewish. And we think that's important. These are some data about rituals. Even the most secular, even the most minimally connected Jew, for whatever reason, Hanukkah, maybe they have 8 chances to take part in it. They do it. But again, what we're finding is that people are not institutionally connected, but they're not totally disconnected, and that's really, really important. Here's some of the institutional stuff, and this is, first of all, with kids. You have low levels of children being involved in formal Jewish schools, part-time schools, day schools. One of the most interesting developments that we've been looking at, not only here but across the country, is how the internet has allowed kids, young people, children, to learn, to even prepare for B'nai Mitzvah, but do it online with a tutor. It could be a tutor in Israel. It could be a tutor almost anywhere, but not do it as part of their, I'll call it a kehillah, a community here. You have a relatively low level of involvement. Close to 90% of eligible children are not in Jewish ECE, early childhood education. We could schreigewalt about that. We could say, oh, how terrible that is. But use my line again, it is an opportunity to do something about it. Jewish philanthropy, somewhat lower level of Jewish philanthropy in other places than in other places. And I think it has to do both with the Jewish community, but it also has to do with the culture of Oregon, of this part of the world. One of the things, and I'm just picking out stuff that I thought might be of interest, there's been a lot of discussion, and it seems particularly important in this community, given that you have so many newcomers coming to the area. You've had so many people who are recent arrivals, who don't have generations of family here, don't have experience here. Are they welcomed? Well, very few people don't feel unwelcomed, and many people do feel welcomed when they choose to take advantage of it. What we see, though, and actually, I'm going to skip to what are the limiting conditions to what are the barriers to participation in Jewish life. And basically people said to us they hadn't found their niche. They hadn't found something that was of interest to them. Some of it just logistics, the area, traffic, what have you. One of the things that interests me is that their lack of confidence in their Jewish knowledge, their fear of being in a Jewish setting where they don't say or do the right thing. And someone asked me earlier today, well, that's not a correct perception. Can't we just get them to think right that the community doesn't care? And I said, I'm a psychologist, a social psychologist, and in my business, perception is reality. And in fact, people, if they feel that, then it is real. And so we have to find ways to do that. And we had a long discussion earlier this afternoon of the ways in which the Jewish community around the country, around the world, has figured out some strategies to have low barriers for participation, where people don't have to have this feeling of being unprepared, of not knowing, etc. It's everything from birthright to one table to PJ Library. And I'm not just picking on, I should pick on examples across the board. Israel. Here it is. Relative to other communities, a slightly lower level of what we consider the key measure of attachment. When you just ask people, how emotionally attached are you to Israel? Only about slightly less than half feel either somewhat or very attached to Israel. But what's interesting here is that half of Jewish adults have been to Israel at least once. Many, by the way, are young people who've gone on birthright. There are even a relatively large group among the people who've gone, who've lived in Israel. And many follow news about Israel. They also have views that are all across the board about Israel. From almost everyone thinks that Israel should be a democratic state, but the role that Israel plays in terms of caring about Israel being an essential part of being Jewish, or Israel living up to its values with respect to human rights, there's lots of disagreement. tell me an issue in the Jewish community, tell me a Jewish text about which there's not disagreement. Disagreement is part of who the stiff-necked people that B'nai Yisrael are about, and we'll talk in a moment about what might be done about that. It was really quite wonderful to see the pictures of the 75th mission and to hear about the plans for the family trip next year. We also did, just working quickly through this, some analyses of what has traditionally been called poverty, but it turns out, and if you look at the right side of the slide, Jews today are not poor in the sense that they were at some point, like 100 years ago, 125 years ago, when many of our alphabet soup of Jewish organizations got created to support the new immigrants coming to this country. People are struggling. It sometimes means that they have what others would consider substantial wealth, good jobs, etc. But they remain one illness, a divorce, all sorts of problems, macroeconomic problems, away from not being able to maintain their standard of living. And I think that requires a different set of strategies. One of the other things I'll point to, and this is one of the things that has happened in the wake of COVID. COVID had its physical effects most prominently on those who were older. But COVID had an even more serious effect on the mental health of those who were younger. And we're now discovering a whole set of mental health issues. And when we look at families that are struggling and figuring out what to do, oftentimes it's not just physical illness, but it's mental illness or some chronic disease. So I wanted to end talking about, and I'm just throwing out data, but want to try to bring it together by saying to you that yes, this is a community that is large, clearly has enormous strengths. It's welcomed a whole new, I'll call it, generation of people into the community, but you're still in the process of figuring out how to make the Jewish community of Greater Portland be a meaningful place institutionally for these individuals. So, as part of this week's parashah, we're going to read Sarah Dibrot. We're going to read the Ten Commandments, and some of us are going to talk about the concept of Naaseh v'nishma, this idea that we act and then we listen. And what I want to suggest to you is that part of the Jewish response to any set of issues is not just to cogitate about the problem, not just to think deeply about the problem. Yes, we want to do that, but it's also to act. And it seems to me, in terms of education, in terms of how you deal with newcomers, how you support families in need, how you deal with the differences in views about Israel and the situation that Israel is faced. That there are multiple things, if you're willing to take the risks, that you can try to address this and strengthen the community that is really quite an extraordinary place. So I thank you for giving me the privilege, on behalf of Matt Boxer and our team at Brandeis, all that you've done to make it possible for us to work with you and I hope this is the beginning of a productive set of conversations. So thank you.